Lead me to some soul today. Oh, teach me, Lord, just what.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to episode number 58 of a series of a podcast here with a series of episodes that we're calling Leading Others to Christ. My name is Dan Barker, and I preach for the Creekside Church of Christ in Franklin, Indiana, and I also serve there as one of the shepherds. For those of you that don't know, of course, everybody, if you've listened to any of the episodes, you know I do this at the beginning of every one of them. But Franklin is about 20 miles south of downtown Indianapolis, to give a ballpark picture there of where we are. We just have really enjoyed this process. This was we called it a COVID project, and it's turned into just one fascinating thing. But to get back on script here a little bit, for those of you that know me, you know that I'm passionate about our subject today of evangelism and how to lead others to Christ. And I have been ever since I obeyed the gospel when I was 21 years old in Owensboro, Kentucky. And I think so many times about the ones that reached out to me and the techniques, if you will, that they reached out to teach me and to try to get me to slow down and listen to the truth. And again, so ever since then, I've been trying to learn, read everything I can get my hands on, talk to anybody that I can about how to be better at doing this myself. And that led to this idea of, well, what if we did a podcast and found the fellow workers out there that are doing this? Find out who they are, where they are, how they do their work, how they set up their studies, what material do they use, and the whole. And that is the backdrop, if you will, on us doing this. And the interviews have been quite fascinating. I wrote down some thoughts earlier. Some of the things that we've learned, I'm going to put under the amazing category. I'm going to say amazing, some very encouraging, and some, I hesitate to say, even some very discouraging because of the realities of some things that are going on out there right now. And we're in a war, and we've got to realize this. We were told, Paul talked about that in Ephesians, and we're in a war against Satan, and we need to wake up and realize just how serious this is. It's affecting our family and friends and even members of our congregation, and we need to wake up, if you will. But you know, I always quote this passage in 2 Timothy 2:2, where Paul's talking to Timothy, and he says, the things that you've heard from me among many witnesses, commit these to faithful men, and it's to faithful men and women who will be able to teach others also. And then later in the chapter, Paul encourages Timothy and us to be useful for the master. You know, so it's like, what does that mean? How can I be useful for the master? So anyway, we are delighted today to have someone with us. I'm confident we're going to learn a lot from. And we have with us today Dean Harvison. Welcome, Dean.
Oh, good to be here. Just very thankful. I really appreciate it.
Well, we're excited to have you. And your name came up a couple of times when I was down in Alabama a couple of weeks ago. And Dean works and worships with the Vestavia Church of Christ there in Birmingham. Is it in Birmingham? Or is it in Vestavia? What's the address?
It's in Vestavia, which is a little confusing because really Birmingham proper, has kind of shrunk. And so really you have just lots and lots of truce. There, people will call Vestavia a suburb, but it is its own city. And there's really like 20 of those in the surrounding area. Birmingham proper is not very big anymore.
Well, I thought we would do that to give everybody, like I said, 20 miles south of Indy, to get a picture around Birmingham there.
That's right.
But I know you also serve as one of the deacons, and my wife Gay and I were able to be down there a couple of weeks ago. We heard you teach a class. You did an excellent job in that class, and I'm serious when I say you did a really good job. And we've talked on the phone a couple of times, so that was the first time that we met. And isn't it strange? I'm going to get to know you better doing this, doing a Zoom, because we didn't have the time to get together. But there'll be another time, Lord willing. But what I like to do, Dean, is to start out with what we call a short bio. for those that don't know who Dean is, would you give us a little short bio of, start literally from where you were born, go to how you obeyed the gospel and who taught you and what do you do for a living? And so kind of bring us up to speed, if you would.
Yeah. I heard you kind of phrased in another interview, like the elevator speech. I was like, I hope it's a tall building, but that's a mouthful. No. So I grew up in the Birmingham area, a little small rural town called Pinson, Alabama. And I just really had, I hope this doesn't seem immodest at all, but I just had such an ideal childhood, great family, super engaged mom and dad, grandparents, aunts, uncles. I mean, I just had a great life, and went to the same school for all 12 years at Pinson High School, or Pinson all the way through high school. Moving on past that, really started, but an ideal childhood, but also very modest when it comes to the money part of it. So I ended up just working, going to college and working at the same time. And really, my life really changed with not being dramatic. It really did change. Actually, about 24 years ago, almost to the day, I met just a coincidence there. I met my now wife 24 years ago on October 28th, and that really did change my life in a lot of ways. I know any spouse has a major impact on anybody's life, of course. But really, you think about kind of the big things in your life. I mean, your family, your career, and then your spiritual life. I mean, that's kind of like almost your entire life. And Tori is my wife's name, and she impacted majorly in all three of those areas. And so the first is intuitive, right? I mean, she's married with children, and so that's the obvious part. The less obvious part would be. She introduced me to her dad's company at that time, and he had a little small furniture business selling furniture to colleges. She invited me through him. Hey, why don't you go work with my dad on a job or two to installing furniture to colleges? I mean, I didn't know them. I only knew them like a week or two, and they invited me to go work for them, like installing some furniture at a college. And went and did that and started working with him through college. And there's a lot more to tell later on. But the short of it is, I graduated college. He invited me to come work for him full time. Did that, and man, that was 22 years ago now. And so this is all I've ever done. So he unfortunately passed away many years ago. He had a terrible disease called ALS. Yes. And so that left her only brother and myself to try to keep the wheel spinning. And so we've done okay with that furniture business. We actually have a blast, to be blunt. We have a great time with our furniture business, and I may say more about that a little bit later. But I guess the most important thing, though, frankly, is the spiritual aspect of that. I'll kind of mention my childhood again, and tell me if we need to interact some more, if I need to just launch into the spiritual part of it. Does that sound good?
Great. Yeah, you're doing great. Yeah.
Well, so again, I just mentioned how good my childhood is, and that also included in a lot of ways some spiritual things. I mean, I grew up in a different background from the Lord's church, and grew up early on until I was 12 with the Assembly God group. I don't know if you're familiar with that group or not, but that group made a big impact with their enthusiasm and charisma. And then about when I was 13, my parents decided to go to a local Baptist church, and so I would say really that was where my real roots are, because that's when you're kind of really starting to pay attention, 13 through 20 or so. And just a great group of people, and learned, just really learned a lot from that. And then, but when I met Tori, she you can imagine, we were both very, a lot of, I've heard a lot of people when they talk about their background, and it was outside the Lord's church. A lot of people I talked to, they were pretty superficial in their religious background. At least the people I talked to a lot. That was not the case with me. I was very, very engaged, very spiritual minded. I think, I don't mean that to say anything good about myself, but that's the way my parents taught me. My grandparents taught me. My granddad I mean, he told me on a regular basis, I was very close to my granddad. He said, I don't care what you do. You live in such a way that you make sure you go to heaven. And so that was instilled on me. And it was instilled that, the Bible is the absolute word of God. And so anything it says, you do. And so although my understanding of the Bible began to change, and I'll come back to that in a moment as I got to know Tori, but those principles, really shaped me to do what I needed to do once I understood some more about the Bible. So if that makes sense.
No, it really does. And in fact, I feel compelled to kind of jump in there on the blessing of that, of the positive things and the encouragement that you got, to have spiritual things a part of your life, even though, and you know what I mean when I say this, even though they didn't have the big picture, they didn't have the full understanding themselves, but I try to tell people all the time, every group out there, there's good, honest people in there, and they don't know what they don't know, and most of the people, they are just, they started going because that's where grandma and grandpa went. And then they just keep repeating, they keep hearing the preachers and their pastors keep teaching the same thing over and over. Unfortunately, most never investigate for themselves by looking in God's word to compare what they're hearing to what the Bible has to say. And like you hinted at earlier, is that sometimes when people see that for the first time, they get angry. And they don't understand because this can't be right, But I want to get off the sidetrack on that. But I went through that myself, and so I understand completely. And we've talked about this before, and not to make a difference, if you will, but I guess I'm going to. The difference in the thought process of the ones that, to use the phrase, grew up in the church versus the ones that did not. And there's just a different, we're all we're all teaching the same thing. But just having that background, it'd be like it would be like a Jew that grew up during the time of Christ. And then, the day of Pentecost, they hear this. They knew a Messiah was coming. They had just never connected the dot that this Jesus was really him. And, but that transition to go from Judaism, and, we've studied, think about that transition to go from being a Jew to being a Christian. Look at that. Look at all that transition. And then starting with Cornelius, with all the Gentiles, that same thing of them coming from their background. Many of them were religious minded. They were just into idolatry and pagan gods and all those kind of things. But when if you grew up in it, there's things that I think you just don't see and don't understand because you haven't been there. You don't know what it's like to be told that you're wrong. You don't know what it's like to be wrong and have to deal with that in a whole other conversation, in itself. But
no, it's a great point. It's a great point, and that's actually a great kind of segue to, if you would like, just to kind of touch on my little experience and when I first. Would that be a good thing to do? And
yes, sir. Please.
Yeah. So you got to be succinct with this. There's all these other juicy details, that goes on with that. But just the succinct version is, it wasn't just as quick. I mentioned how quickly Tori introduced me to her family with her company. Well, she introduced me even quicker, to inviting me to church. And so she invited me to church, and I was like, oh, this is great. I would love to go to church with you. And so, went there. This is probably, we went 10 days after I knew her. And I'll tell you a little parenthetical comment about Tori makes her unique. So she's 48, I'm 45. So she's gone to Vestavia Church of Christ for 48 years.
Wow.
And so it's really, that's a neat little trivia about my wife. She's never gone anywhere else. So it's and so I thought it was kind of interesting. So she invited me promptly to church, as you can imagine. Went there and just trying to make this concise, but went there and just really was just totally bewildered, about what I heard. It made no sense to me.
Right.
And what I mean, referring to, the typical different topics, about, mainly baptism, for example. And I was like, well, there's just, because I guess, Dan, my biggest hang up and all that was to get just cut to the chase of it was like, there's no way, in my words back then, there's no way that, now make up a percentage, 99% plus people have it wrong. And when this little tiny group, has an understanding about this one area different than anybody else. I mean, that made no sense to me. It was totally illogical. And so really, as I kind of mentioned to you before, Kenny Mars was the first gospel preacher I ever heard in the Church of Christ. And yeah, man, that guy made me mad as a hornet. I was like, I'm embarrassed what I said about, Kenny to Tory, behind his back. I later very sincerely reconciled all that, told him what I said about him, later on, and he just gave me a hug. But he ended up performing our wedding ceremony later on. But
well, what a great story! That's great.
We became and are still good friends, and so I still keep up with him on a regular basis. He travels all over the world, sharing the Mozambique and Russia, and so he's a neat person. So, but there was one key thing that happened though. So I think it was a little mistake. That I think we could learn from. So I worship with in my opinion, by the most amazing people, loving people, friendly people. But I tell you what, that may be a constructive criticism. I sit there at Vestavia. It's no one's fault. It's just the thing that happened. But I did sit there for almost a full year, Dan, before anybody asked me to study. And, it's hard to know exactly why. I think people were intimidated. They're like, what, is he open to it? I mean, I think all those things go into it. I had a strong personality. I think that probably had a factor into it. And, I was very passionate about what I believed. I was vocal about it, and so maybe there's, I don't use the word intimidating, but maybe there was just some hesitancy there. But I did sit there a full year and I got madder every Sunday or every Bible class, because they're hearing something in dialogue with somebody about it. And so you fast forward a year of getting mad. I almost broke up numerous times about this issue, and I thought we're never going to get resolved. We need to just be done. And so finally, a year later, a gentleman named Bill Couchman, a deacon at Vestavia, asked me to study. And so he asked me to study. And listen, I was like, absolutely. I was so ready to vent my frustrations because as sound as Tori was and is, she wasn't the right person to talk to. It was just too emotional. So we would just get into it rather than being healthy. And so with Bill sat down with me, and I'll wrap this up. So we got other things to talk about, but Bill sat down with me, and within one session, Dan, I mean, he really helped me understand. It wasn't like that, like, oh, okay, we're done. But it was a massive transformation in one session, because you know what he let me do, Dan? He let me just vent for a little bit.
Yeah.
And there's no telling how many wrong things I said in that one probably 15, 20-minute vent. I don't even remember what I said, but I know it had to be an onslaught of accusations. And he didn't try to correct everything I said.
Right.
He picked one thing. He said, well, let me just talk about one thing. And so he said, I understand what you're saying. I think you made a lot of great points. He said, but let's talk about one area. And he focused on one thing. And I tell you what, just after a year of being mad, within a couple of months of studying, I got baptized in January 5th, 1999, a couple months later. So it really taught me how critical it was when someone comes to your worship service, especially who's coming on a regular basis. That's just low hanging fruit, if you will. And man, ask them for a study. All they can say is no. And so, and it might save a lot of hardship, and it might even, but he was the right person to study with me. He was just as kind as he could be.
Is Bill still there?
He's the elder at Caba Heights Church of Christ.
Okay. I do this all the time, but, maybe if you haven't done it in a while, just make it sometime, text him or just make a quick phone call and then tell him that you were sharing that story and you just wanted to say, Bill, thank you. Thank you,
I
brother.
will. I will, Dan.
And that will make his day because so many times we forget to say, and I'm not saying that, but we forget to say thank you and show appreciation even to our own brothers and sisters.
Oh, that's
But
beautiful. That's beautiful.
yeah,
Do you know when, by my good wife's encouragement, she's prompted me to do that several times throughout these 20 years. And when I preached my first sermon, I text them. When I was able to baptize the first person I ever baptized, I text them. And so I've done little things like that, but I haven't done that in a while. So I would like your encouragement. I'll do just that.
okay, well, good. All right, boy, so many things we could talk about there, but just to again see the perspective, and I can understand that. Matt can understand that. Who's behind the scenes here, but of getting frustrated and not understanding, and even getting angry about things, and I think sometimes the ones that grew up around it, they don't understand. They can't even imagine how somebody could be upset or disturbed about something. And so we need to talk about that. The Christians need to talk about this so we can be more aware and understand the people that we're trying to teach. And I'm so glad that Bill had the patience with you and that he did and let you vent, because we need to be able to do that too. And then once it's out, it sounds like you're that way. Once you get the venting out, now that it's out of the way, now maybe you'll listen
That's
to
right.
what happens. And a lot of people are like that. I think they really are. Matt's going to be raising his hand here anytime, but one thing we've got down, well, and the one thing I've got that at the end too. And maybe your conversion story is what we ought to just stay with. I always ask everybody, is there a conversion story you'd like to share? But yours, Dean, that's really good. And even just to use that, number one, that Tori invited you as quickly as she could, and I saw a thing pop up on the screen there. I thought that's what was meant. But anyway, just the patience that she had. And my wife, Gay, was like that with me. She was very patient and in helping me when we first started dating, when I was looking at the truth. But is there a conversion story that you've been involved in that you'd like to share?
Oh, yeah, and of course, obviously, by your other interviews, I knew you had asked. It's just there's so many good ones out there, right? But one fun one. I'll pick a fun one. How about that?
That's good.
I mentioned just briefly about the furniture business is a big part of my life. We sell furniture all over the nation and to colleges, universities, and so inevitably we're always on the road. We're always on road trips, and our favorite restaurant. So this will be a commercial for Cracker Barrel, but our favorite road place is Cracker Barrel. Being all the guys and college guys mainly, we hire. Make that make more sense. We hire college guys during the summer to travel around with us to install the furniture wherever we're going. And I had one installer, good friend already by this point, and just an awesome guy. And we were by ourselves, which is unusual, normally with a group of people, but it was just him and myself. And we talked about the Bible a lot already, just various things, and just very spiritually minded person and big heart. And so we started talking, and we just kept, how Dan, you've been there before when you're halfway decent at reading people, man. He was like locked in. I was like, okay here. So we just kept talking, and we started at dinner, so we left Cracker Barrel 2 or 3 hours later, and we been talking about the Bible the whole time. Well, we're staying out of town together, so we went straight from the car to the hotel, and just kept talking about the Bible. And
Wow.
And so we get to the hotel, and he's like, he said, Dean, he's like, man, I was like, nah, he said, I'm getting a little concerned about where I am in my spiritual life, and I'm like, well, so I understand, my brother. I really do understand, my friend. And I said, so we kept talking, and so I would never exaggerate something that's so important as a soul being converted. So when I say it was right at midnight and we were still talking, And I just thought it was, you know where I'm going with this because you just can't resist this. I'm like, well, I said, Wes, let me tell you, tell you something. I was like, there is somebody just the same situation. So I obviously went to the Philippian jailer, and it showed how they immediately, went and got baptized at midnight. And I said, you can do the exact same thing. He said, where in the world are we going to get baptized at midnight? I said, well, we're staying in the hotel. They got a pool, man. And so, man, we went out there, and I actually went out there and we baptized them all by ourselves. And then, there's all sorts of fun stories like that, but that's a fun one to me just because it was, I don't know exactly, but I guess it was some in the neighborhood of a 6-hour Bible discussion going all the way from, covering every question he had and leading him to kind of some salvation issues. And so it was it was a blast, and still close to that guy, of course. And so anyway, but those were some fun ones.
No, that's great. It's like, and some of the stories, and you mentioned the Philippian jailer. I mean, can you imagine them getting together and talking about, think about that, the earth, the jail, the earthquake, the wiping the blood off the strike, wiping, cleaning them up, and then they were baptized, and the whole family, and the rejoicing, and and I like the way you use that. It is fun, but from the standpoint of not the way we think of it secularly, but just the joy and the excitement, and of realizing that my sins have been washed away, and I'm now a child of God. I mean, I can't think of anything that would make you that would be more funner. Is that that's not that, you can't say it that way, more funner, but anyway.
Man, we're from the South. You can say however you want to. And
there you go.
Yeah. Dan, the only thing I don't want to make a mistake in doing, since this podcast is central on leading others to Christ, you hear these extraordinary stories like that, and they are exciting to talk about. But I know we're going short on time, but I do want to say something just for anybody listening. There have been a quite a number of people at Vestavia, because it's a larger group than some other groups. We got that benefit of 300 people or so, and I've had more than a couple of men at the congregation who were already married, and they were not Christians, but they still attended. And I had one gentleman, it just love that guy. I saw him actually just a few days ago in the community. He still goes to Vestavia, and I saw him out and about, and we just chatted about this actually. And so, I tried to study with him when he first started coming, and, did a few studies, and just nothing happened. Well, years plural passed. And he texted me and said, listen, I really have some hesitancy saying this but it's not about me at all. But he did text me. He said, I appreciate, I've been watching you for years, doing what you do. And he said, I remember when we studied a long time ago, and hearing the sermons, of course. And he said, I'm ready to get baptized. And I'm like, isn't that something? Yeah. I mean, I just kind of forgot. I didn't forget about him, but I kind of forgot about him, And so my point is, like, there's so many people in a lot of congregations that are there with spouses. It's like, go build relationships with them, study with them, just try to stay connected to them, because you talk about just what a waste for anybody to not be a Christian who is actually coming to services on a weekly basis. There should not be a person that's like that for long.
Well, again, back to your personal experience, you've been there, done that, right? You sat there for that year in your frustration, and nobody's saying anything to you, and now you're sensitive to that. And I think we have to learn from that, and I know you will, and you've shared that with other people. But yeah, there's people all around it. We say, I don't know anybody to teach, and they're sitting down the pew from. They could, and they're all around us, and we just have to put our awareness hat on, if you will, and say, okay, I need to approach her. I need to approach him, and that is so good. Hey, we're out of time. One thing, I always end it with one thing. From your experience, and somebody says, you know what? I realize now I'm supposed to have been doing this. I have not been, or maybe I used to do it. I got discouraged and I quit. What would you say would be one thing that you would say to them that they need to learn how to do to get involved in leading others to Christ?
Sure. The way I like to think about that question is to think about myself, not what I would say to them, but what I need to tell myself every day. And that is to have an eternal perspective, to have a perspective of what my granddad taught me, and that is the only thing that matters is going to heaven. And the only thing that matters is helping other people go to heaven. And Dan, I want to confess to you, I want to try to be somebody I'm not. At times I've been like that. At times I haven't. I've done better than others. I've done worse at other times. But when I do well, it's because I have an eternal perspective. That kind of sounds kind of like a lofty concept, but all that means is you're just thinking about spiritual things throughout the day, because we think we have to go like on a door knocking campaign, to find somebody that you want to study with. If you want to do that, go do it. I'm not knocking that, but if you have an eternal perspective, you're just thinking about the Lord. And again, I'm succeeded in these times, and I failed in these things. I mean, I'm not want to be clear about that. But if you're having an eternal perspective, when I have an eternal perspective, that means I'm constantly thinking about spiritual things, and opportunities abound when that happens, Dan. I mean, it's like you just constantly meet somebody. It's that awareness. And I just think about the dozens and dozens of people that I've had an opportunity to share all this with, I guess hundreds, and, just in daily life, it wasn't by me like trying to go manufacture a conversation, with knocking on someone's door or doing a mail campaign. Again, all that's great if you need to are so inclined to do so. But I would say in most cases, it's just people you meet at the grocery store, at the people we mentioned Cracker Barrel, with the people, just good people serving you food and, doing honest work like that. And it just goes on and on. So I would say that's my one thing that I try to do better. I need to do better about is constantly be thinking about eternal things. And that way it's going to motivate you to reach out to somebody who you meet. Because I think that's where really effective evangelism takes place is people you naturally meet.
Well, you've touched on it a couple of times, the value and the power of building relationships. And I think that's something that it needs to be taught. It literally has to be taught, because some are naturally good at it, others are not. And it's like everything else in life. But I really do believe in how to invite, how to ask, how to, ask that server at Cracker Barrel, give her a card, invite her to services. One thing I learned on Cracker Barrel, I have to do this. I can eat on the kids menu at a 75-year-old. And my Coke is free. It's included.
That's funny.
But listen, would you be willing to share your contact information with everybody? If so, and the reason I've been doing this, but let's say that somebody's listening to this and they've got that husband, they've got that wife, they've got that friend, they've got that coworker, and maybe they're wanting to be able to reach out to them. And if they could say, they might be thinking, if I could talk to Dean maybe for just a few minutes on the phone, maybe he could give me some suggestions or ideas how I could approach him or her. So what would be the best way to contact you, Dean?
Yeah, I'm a big texter. I live and die by text. And so emails sometimes get lost a little bit. So I would just want somebody to text my cell number, and that's 205-335-8801. And just shoot me a text and let me know.
Do that number.
Oh, of course.
Do the number again. It kind of shorted there a little bit.
Oh, really? I'm sorry. 205-335-8801.
Okay.
That good now?
Yeah, we got it. Brother, thank you. And I know you're a busy man, and we appreciate so much, Matt, and I appreciate you taking the time this morning. And I've said this a couple of times. I think maybe there'd be a follow-up meeting somewhere, follow-up interview somewhere down the road. But Well,
Well,
but listen, I want to thank you and the whole congregation there for inviting Gay and I to come down. We really enjoyed that, and that was a good experience for us. So, thanks for being so welcoming to us while we were there in Birmingham.
oh, listen, and thanks for the invite. It was always a little embarrassing to talk about yourself, actually, but I hope it did somebody a little good, and I just appreciate what you and Matt are doing. What a wonderful thing you're trying to do, and I'm familiar with the podcast now because of this. I've already listened to several episodes, and so it'll be a regular listen for sure.
Well, good. And be sure and share it with your friends if you would. That's how we're
I
getting the
will.
word out. So,
I will.
all right, brother. Well, thank you again. And Lord willing, we'll see you soon. And keep up your good work. Okay.
Thank you guys so much. You take
And
care.
hey, on a personal note, tell Tori, thank you. Give her a hug for Gay and I and for inviting you to church and starting this whole process. How about that?
Gosh, I'll be glad to. Yeah. You take care. You
All right.
take care.
All right. Thanks, brother.
Okay.
Bye bye.
Melt my heart and fill my life. Give me one soul today.